Welcome to the Empowered Women Life Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Karen Bashford. This podcast is for every woman who has ever felt limited by her past, silenced by trauma, or held back by society's expectations. Each week, we will share powerful stories, expert insights, and practical tools to help you become the leader of your own life. I have the pleasure of introducing JD Rose, who we had a very, very interesting conversation on a topic that I have sort of covered, but JD is going to give you a lot more insight into, because she is a financial well-being coach. So JD, welcome. Please introduce yourself, and I'd love, as I explained earlier, to hear your journey in how you become a financial well-being coach.
Thank you, Karen. It's a pleasure to be here. I think you did the best job of introducing me, and I think the story will be its own introduction to me. So I'm just going to start at the beginning because my early childhood is primarily the reason that I became a financial well-being coach for women, and I think you all will understand that as I walk you through the context here. So to understand my childhood, I think it's important to understand my mother, a little bit about her and how she grew up, because her parents, my grandparents, were born in the time of the Great Depression here in the U.S., and they are from West Virginia, a poor state, Appalachia, all the stereotypes that go with that. That's the picture you can have in your mind for my grandparents and their upbringing. And they somehow made a life for themselves beyond that. And both of them became, strong in their careers. My grandfather was a commercial architect. My grandmother was a career secretary. So she worked for local, state, and federal government throughout her career. And they really pulled themselves out of an impoverished life. And that's the world that my mother grew up in. She grew up in a household that I would say is probably upper middle class. They lived in a very wealthy neighborhood. My grandfather built their house. It was beautiful. It was this architectural wonder or whatnot. But she grew up in a family that was very dysfunctional. Her mother was an alcoholic. There was a lot of dysfunction in the relationship between my mother's parents. And she grew up in the 60s. So she was also in that like sex, drugs, rock and roll rebel time. And she became pregnant with me at the age of 19. So the way I understand it, she and my biological father wanted to get married and raise me together. But my grandparents were having none of that. And they forbade her, basically. They made her choose between either him or them. And she chose them because she was 19 years old, like with a baby. What's she going to do? Not choose her family? And so she was very excited to have me. I felt like I came into the world feeling really loved by my mother. That was never a question in my mind, but there was a lot of chaos and instability as I was growing up. My grandparents made my mother marry her first husband, who was not my biological father. That was a very short-lived marriage. And in my first memories, my father was actually her second husband. And he was my father figure for the first 10 years of my life. But those first 10 years, we moved around a lot. He was very controlling. He, I would say, was probably a narcissistic personality to the best of my understanding and recollection. And she left that marriage when I was 10 years old. And then there was another marriage after that. So she she had a really chaotic experience with men and relationships. And we moved up and down the social status ladder financially. There were times when she was on food stamps. We were living in a house that had no heat. But then there were other times when, like when I was 7 or 8 years old, we were living in this big, beautiful, rambling Victorian home in this beautiful town. And, life was good and money was flowing. So I got lots of strange messages about money growing up. And my mother was bipolar, which we did not know at the time. It went undiagnosed for many years. I don't think it was something that was really even talked about, and mental health was certainly stigmatized. Anybody with mental health issues at the time, it wasn't something that you really talked about or knew much about. So I think that had a big impact on her relationships as well, and her experience with men. I think because I was an only child, because I loved my mom so much and we were kind of growing up together, I sort of took on, I had multiple roles with her, which was confusing for me. Like, obviously, I was her daughter, but I was also like, we were best friends for many, many, many years into my adulthood. Um, but I also had to parent her. She had this trustingness about her, this naivete about people and circumstances. And I was always trying to protect her and make sure that she was safe in whatever our circumstances were that were unfolding. So I was parentified at a really young age. And my nervous system, I didn't know it at the time, but it was developing in this really chaotic set of circumstances where we were constantly moving to different homes. I moved 13 times in my first 14 years as a child. And that was normal. Like, it wasn't a problem for me at the time, but I was always the new kid when I was in school. And I ended up getting bullied a lot from like age 9 to 12 in school. And I think that was part of it, just because I was new and that's what you do to outsiders. So there was just a lot of danger. There was a lot of threat that we were trying to manage together. And I watched my mother for many years as a single mother after she divorced her third husband when I was 13 years old. I was a latchkey kid. Like, she was working 2 jobs. I would come home after school and, put dinner on the table for us and take care of whatever needed to be taken care of at home. So it was one of those situations where I realized, oh my gosh, we're on our own. We have to make this happen. And I could feel the tension of that she was experiencing. And I think that I was constantly trying to regulate, not just for myself, but for her as well. So there was this interesting turning point that happened when I was about 13 years old. And we were living in that home in a rental property by ourselves. The woman who was our landlady, funny, she owned a B&B in the same town that we lived in. And so she had a person who was staying there who was some random guest. But he happened to be on the board of directors or the steering committee or some sort of position like that for a private Quaker school in another state. So at that time, I had just completed the PSATs. It was like a practice SAT sort of thing in school, and done really, really well on them. And my mom was always singing my praises to anybody who would listen. She loved me so much. She was always so proud of me. It was really sweet. And she had told our landlady, Bunny, about how well I did on that. And Bunny said, oh, well, she has to meet this gentleman who is, on the head of the steering committee at the school and whatnot. So I go and I meet this guy, older man, like probably in his 50s or 60s at the time. I remember him teaching me, or trying to teach me, how to play chess. I was not that smart. I never really picked that up. But the next thing I knew, the universe was sort of organizing circumstances to remove me from this chaotic, stressful situation in childhood that I had been in, and plopping me down in a much more stable scenario. This man invited us to come up and take a look at the school, and he was going to put in a good word for me with admissions and whatnot. And as luck would have it, my mother was working with a woman whose sister was enrolled at that school states away. And that woman said, oh, well, I'm going to visit my sister. Why don't you just come with us on our visit? So the next thing you know, I'm a couple of states away in this spectacular campus. I mean, the school had like 200 acres with apple orchards and beautiful brick buildings. I mean, it looked like something out of a storybook. And I'm meeting people and we're touring the campus. And the next thing I know, I'm in an interview with admissions. And I mean, in a matter of a couple of weeks, I was enrolled in this school for the fall on a full ride scholarship because we didn't have any money. And I spent the next 4 years in this really stable, loving, nurturing, structured environment. And it changed everything for me. It really gave me a sense of my own aptitude. I know my mom was always talking about how smart and creative and brilliant I was and whatnot when I was a kid, but I didn't believe any of that. And I certainly wasn't getting that feedback from the kids around me at school, right? But in this really stable boarding school experience, I met the most kind people and compassionate people. I learned so much. It was like for the first time in my life, I really understood that there were possibilities available in a way that I never understood before. And when I went through that high school experience, it basically was just unfolding as it's expected that you'll go to college from here. Like there's no question mark about that. Everything that they were doing was, teaching kids and preparing them for a college experience. And so then college just unfolded after that. Again, pretty much a free ride with some, well, not a free ride entirely. There was some, I took out a pretty substantial college loan at the time. It was a substantial, and it took many, 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 many years for me to pay that off because I never learned about money growing up. When I graduated from college, I graduated into a recession. I was doing the process of elimination thing, looking for jobs, trying to find my way in the work world. And that took many years. That probably took the entire decade of my 20s to kind of get myself oriented in some sort of career trajectory. So yeah, it was just a lot of navigating the unknown and I guess a different form of chaos in adulthood, right? Because you don't know what it's like to be an adult. My mother had prepared me and my experiences growing up had prepared me to be very adaptive and very resilient because I could talk to anybody in any kind of environment from pretty much any background. And I sort of found my way, but all along, I knew that it wasn't just me having to make it happen. Like it wasn't just me finding my way and like doing the hard work, even though I was working hard. I always knew, like even from like childhood, that there was some larger force at work in my life. And I think also in the lives of everyone around me, although I wasn't quite as aware of that when I was young. But it's that force that's sort of been steering me in different directions. And that was the force that steered me into the wellness industry. I ended up getting my training and licensure as a massage therapist when I was in my early 30s. Pardon me while I take a sip of water. I'm not used to talking this much at length.
Well, while you're doing that, I've got a question for you.
Yes.
You obviously had 3 stepfathers.
Mm-hmm.
What did you learn from them about life? Because obviously they would have had different attitudes and different behaviors and such like the person who had this lovely house with money and such like, and then a person who didn't. So what did that teach you about money and life?
I learned that men were dangerous. That was pretty much that was the big learning from every marriage my mother had and pretty much every boyfriend my mother had. My mother was a man magnet. She was physically striking. She was beautiful. She modeled when she was a young girl. And she also, like, she was one of those souls that was so beautiful from the inside out. She just had this pure spirit that I think everyone gravitated toward. So when my mother entered the room, Like there was nobody else in the room. Like every man just turned to look at my mother, wanted to be in her orbit and whatnot. And every time my mother was in a relationship with a man, there was something dangerous or threatening about that situation, right? So with husband number one, I don't remember him, but he was so dangerous, she got out of that marriage within months. With husband number two, my father from age, 2 to 10, he was very controlling. I learned that he couldn't be trusted. When my mother was in the hospital for a health issue when I was 9 years old, he moved his girlfriend into our home and had parties and was doing cocaine. And I mean, it was wild. Like the things that went on in childhood were wild. So from them, I just learned that men were dangerous. And I didn't date when I got older. For the most part, I can count on one hand the number of guys I dated as a young adult. And in terms of money wasn't discussed. Money, I think the messages that I got were like from my grandparents, money represented love. It's how they expressed their love. My mom often had to go to them to like help make ends meet from time to time when she was a single mom with me. And so although it represented love from them, there were also strings attached. They had expectations for what they would get out of that exchange, or how she would behave as a result of that exchange. So yeah, there was always the sense of it was sort of us against them in this push-pull around money. There was a time when she was married to her third husband, well, actually after she had just left her third husband. He was a drug addict and he was physically abusive. It was a very dangerous situation for both of us. And my grandparents tried to swoop in and move us up near them. They offered to buy my mother a house. They offered to buy me a piano and get me piano lessons, trying to get me on their side to convince her to, like, there was this manipulation thing happening there with money. So it was just very strange coming up around that.
So for you to have become a financial well-being coach, you, with your experience of childhood and the men and such like, you bring a different perspective so that of a coach that perhaps has done courses about money mindset and such like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because for many years, I struggled with self-worth just in the way that my mom was struggling with hers, right? We mirror our parents' experience very often. And in my 20s, I realized I need to figure out this money thing because I'm on my own and I need to make this work and I don't know anything. So I did start to educate myself from a practical perspective. And I was able to stabilize things to a certain degree with just having more financial literacy, but I couldn't stop unhealthy behaviors with money. Like I could never still save money. I was, retail therapy was my middle name for many years. I loved shopping and buying clothes. And I was always trying to fill some sense of love or safety or whatever need inside of me that can only come from the inside with external goods. So I've definitely walked the talk on this financial journey, and it's not, I don't think we're ever done. I'm still doing my work with money, but I've definitely come to a place in my own experience where a lot of that is healed and I was able to shift my identity. Because when I entered the wellness industry, as I said, I was a massage therapist, but then I ended up sliding into health coaching for a while. And so I started to learn how to take better care of myself. I was helping other people take better care of them. So as I was helping my clients in that arena, I was actually healing and helping myself on my own journey of well-being. And then when it finally came time to shift into a financial coaching niche, I had already done so much identity work. I'd done so much energetic shifting of who I understand myself to be, what I understand the world to be and our reality to be. Ultimately, your identity is what creates your financial reality. It has nothing to do with income. Because I've worked with women who, 6-figure, 7-figure earners, and they're still so stressed about money. They're still having problems with boundaries and overgiving and or fear that it's going to be taken away. So yeah, it's I have a very I think unique experience that I bring to the table, not just from the experience of being in poverty for stretches of time, but also being around wealthy people, going through that journey of understanding my own self-worth and my own value and really rooting into that. And the way that I did that was deepening into my spiritual belief and in the spiritual and energetic side of our life and our reality. And that is the big piece that I bring to my work. So I feel like right now, financial there's conventional financial services and advice, and that lives in the realm of practical strategy, and that will get you to a certain degree forward because you need skills. But also there's the emotional component, and there's anybody who's gone through trauma in their life, whether it's financial trauma or not, is going to have some sort of behavioral consequence as a result of that. And it's going to show up in how they work with money. It's just how we are as human beings. We can't have interactions with anything in life and not have those impacts show up in our relationships with other people, in our relationships with money, in our relationships to our own health and well-being. And then from the energetic perspective, you know, that I think is ultimately where the stabilization of the shift happens, right? Like when we heal our nervous systems, when we work through those trauma experiences and old identities that we've been carrying around for so long, and we're ready to let go of those and step into something new, there's also a grounding that happens energetically that supports us in doing that, really rooting into the wholeness of ourselves, the wholeness of the universe and the reality that we live within. I mean, you and I are sitting here talking over a computer. Like, it's very, look at the strangeness of our reality right now, right? Like anything is possible. So really just rooting into that belief system that, oh, the unknown isn't something of which we need to be afraid. It's actually this infinite field of possibility that's represented. And
so what would you say the biggest challenge most women face when they start to realize that they have to take responsibility for themselves?
well, the women that I work with are already at the point where they recognize they need to take responsibility for themselves. So that's not something that they need to be convinced of by any means. The biggest challenge they face to start is just being comfortable having a conversation about money, just being willing to sit down and be with money. Most of my clients start out feeling they tend to be very sensitive souls. They're empathic and or like highly sensitive people, and or they have some trauma in their history, and or they're creatives. There's all these different variables that roll into their makeup, but there's a high level of sensitivity. And for most of them, there's a sense that there's something wrong with them. There's a real sense of shame and embarrassment about not being able to get their financial stuff together at whatever stage of the game they're at. And they feel like everybody else has the money gene that they didn't get. And so there's so much self-criticism that they're burdened with. And so to even reach out and ask for help and say, hey, I want to get this in order, but I don't even know how or where to start, is the biggest leap. So by the time they come to me and we can actually sit down and calm their nervous system, that's the first thing I do, is just help them feel safe in their body to even be with money and talk about it. And once we get that stabilized, then we can move on to the other pieces of the equation.
Okay, so on my sensing, what do I want to ask you? If you were to start your journey again, knowing what you know now, What would be the first thing you would do when you were 20 years old, had come out of college? What would you do differently?
What would I do differently coming out of college? It's a great question. And I'm not really sure how to answer it.
Answer it in the best way
I
you
think
can.
when I think about who I was coming out of college, I still felt like I really didn't know what was possible for me then. I was really just sort of following the breadcrumbs and doing the process of elimination towards the life that I wanted to create because I didn't really even know. So I think what I would love to have done differently would be to have had the presence of mind to sit down and ask myself what it was I really wanted to be experiencing in life, rather than feeling like I had to react to circumstances outside of me, to start inside and look at, what do I want to be experiencing? What do I like? Where am I going? Because I don't think I really had a destination in mind. I was really just sort of rolling with the punches and trusting that things would work out right. I did know that things would be okay. I just didn't know how. But I wish that I had known enough to be more proactive in that experience of early adulthood because I just didn't have that knowing.
Precisely. And I'm hoping that with this conversation we've been having, that with what you've just said, it'll help more women, especially, sit down and truly look at what they want in life before they commit to something else, because we often just react due to circumstances. With what you've just shared, it highlights the need to pause and reflect and ask questions. Because in the asking of questions, especially when you consider the older woman has had that experience, but doesn't necessarily have the confidence to sit down and ask themselves what they need.
True, very true. Yeah,
So
I work with a lot of women who the confidence piece is huge, and it's not just with money, right? When we unpack that, because how we do one thing is how we do everything in life, right? Like whatever's showing up in your relationship with money is showing up somewhere else in your life or multiple somewhere else's. So really having that willingness to be open to asking yourself questions and being with the question and just noticing what arises from that. Sometimes, and this is no woman's fault, and there is no fault for the individual who's experiencing that. We are all programmed by our society not to want, not to like to be small, to not have a lot of wants or needs, to make sure that other people's wants and needs are prioritized over our own. So even developing the skill of accessing our desire, it literally is a skill to be cultivated.
Yeah, precisely. And you will not do that if you don't know what you really want yourself, because you're continually doing the same things of supporting others or responding to what they want rather than even considering what you want. So on the final few minutes, what would be the one thing you'd say to a woman who has a choice in front of her? What would you say to her?
That's a great question. Well, there's always a choice in front of us. And I think what I've learned from my own experience and the experience of the women that I've seen around me and worked with is that sometimes there's even more possibilities than even the choice that we see in front of us. So I think I would tell the woman who is noticing there's a choice to be made to take a step back and ask herself what the best possible outcome for the next step in her life would look like for her. And maybe the choice that she has in front of her is exactly like the choices that are there to be made, but maybe there's some other option that is available that she's not even aware of because she hasn't taken that step back. So really giving yourself just time and space to open up to to seeing, oh, am I looking at all the possibilities? Like how could it be even better than this? If I were really to allow myself to just be curious about that, not even to believe that it's possible, but just to be curious about the possibility.
And that's an absolutely fantastic answer. And I apologize for just dropping you in it on that one and the one
Oh, you don't need to
previously.
apologize. I can roll with it.
It's just that with your experience, I felt that you had perhaps some insights that others wouldn't necessarily have, because you've been to the extremes. You've been with wealth and you've been in poverty, but that's through childhood rather than an adult experience, which is a totally different situation. So I almost feel that I had to ask you those questions because of your childhood experiences around money. So, as I say, I was a bit unfair. But
it didn't feel unfair at all to me. Like I said, I'm an open book. You can ask me anything. If I don't have an answer, I don't have an answer. But usually something arises.
Yeah, you've answered them wonderfully. So I will share your details. So if anyone wants to get in touch with you, they can do. But thank you so much for your sharing of your life story. And I just hope some of the listeners can realise that no matter how bad life has been, there's always something better at the end of it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's always magic in life.
Absolutely. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen.